They laughed the moment I walked through those courthouse doors in my grease-stained overalls and mud-crusted work boots. My own daughter-in-law covered her mouth to hide a smirk. My son wouldn't even look at me. But then the young judge on the bench rose halfway out of his chair, his face draining of color, and said 4 words that stopped the entire room cold. "Your Honor, is it you?" Nobody in that courtroom had any idea who I really was. Thank you for spending this time with me. Before I begin, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Has someone in your own family ever tried to convince the world you were less than you are? Your answers matter to me more than you know. A quick note before we start. Certain names and details in this story have been changed for privacy, but the heart of what happened is true. My name is Marcus Doyle. I'm 69 years old, and 3 months ago I stood in a Traverse City, Michigan courtroom wearing overalls that smelled like diesel and cherry sap, clutching a canvas cap in hands that had picked fruit since before my son could walk. Nobody looking at me that morning saw anything but an old farmer who'd wandered somewhere he didn't belong. They didn't see the 26 years I spent as a United States Army judge advocate, presiding over courts-martial from Fort Bragg to Ramstein. They didn't see the man who once stood between a terrified 23-year-old defense attorney and a wrongful conviction that would have ended his career before it started. They saw an old man in work clothes, exactly the way my son and his wife wanted the world to see me. My son, Preston, 41 years old, sat at the plaintiff's table in a charcoal suit that cost more than what I clear from a good cherry harvest. Beside him, his wife Vanessa, 36, wore a cream-colored coat and pearl earrings, her posture perfect, her expression arranged into something that might have passed for concern if you didn't know to look for the calculation underneath it. Their attorney sat between them, a slick young man named Grant Ellery, shuffling papers with the confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. I kept my head down, let my shoulders curve forward, let my hands tremble just slightly around the brim of my cap. The confused old widower. Exactly what they'd built their whole case around. Judge Ronan Cole presided from the bench. 45 years old, sharp-eyed, the kind of judge who read every page of a file before the hearing instead of skimming the summary. He glanced up at me the way any judge glances at a new case walking in. Routine, unremarkable, another Monday morning docket entry. Then his eyes caught something around my neck. I hadn't hidden them. I never do. The 2 dented steel dog tags on their beaded chain, tucked half inside my collar but not fully, the way I'd worn them every day for 40 years. Through 2 wars and a marriage and a courtroom career, and now through an orchard full of cherry trees my late wife, Eleanor, and I had planted with our own hands, Judge Cole's face went the color of old paper. His hand, halfway to the gavel, stopped in midair and began very slightly to shake. "Bailiff," he said, his voice unsteady in a way that a man who has presided over 1,000 hearings should never sound. "Give me 1 moment," Preston noticed. His confident half-smile faltered for the first time all morning. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, flicking between the judge and me, recalculating something behind that composed face of hers. I said nothing. Let them wonder. 25 years had passed since Fort Leavenworth, since a courtroom that smelled like radiator heat and burnt coffee, since I had pulled a young defense attorney's career back from the edge of a cliff his own commanding officer had pushed him toward. I had never once expected to see that young man again, let alone from this side of a bench. Let alone on the day my own son tried to have me declared unfit to manage my own life. Grant Ellery cleared his throat and rose to begin. "Your Honor, if we could proceed with the petition for emergency conservatorship, we'll get there." "Mr. Ellery." Judge Cole's eyes hadn't left me. "Give me the file again, the respondent's full name. Marcus Jefferson Doyle, Your Honor." I watched something settle behind Judge Cole's eyes, recognition sliding into certainty. He set the file down very carefully, the way you set down something that might shatter, and folded his hands. "We'll hear arguments," he said. "Counsel, proceed." But his gaze kept drifting back to me, to those 2 dented tags resting against my collarbone, and I understood. He already knew this hearing was not going to go the way my son had planned. But to understand how I ended up in that courtroom, dressed like a man they wanted the world To pity, you need to go back 3 months to a Thursday afternoon in October that started like 1,000 others. The cherry trees along the ridgeline had already dropped most of their leaves by then, and the ones still clinging on had turned that particular rust-orange color Eleanor used to call the color of goodbye. She'd been gone 2 years, but I still saw the orchard the way she used to describe it, season by season, like she was standing right beside me narrating the light. I walked down to the mailbox at the end of our gravel drive, wind cutting sideways off Grand Traverse Bay, cold enough that my breath fogged in front of me. 40 acres of cherry trees stretched behind me, planted the spring after Eleanor and I got married. 43 years of harvests and frost scares, and county fair blue ribbons pinned to the kitchen corkboard. The mailbox held the usual stack, a feed supply catalog, a flyer from the co-op, and a certified letter with a red stamp that read Final Noter from the Grand Traverse County Treasurer's Office. I opened it standing right there at the end of the drive, wind scattering the last of the leaves around my boots. Property tax delinquency, $51,400. 15 days before the county would begin foreclosure proceedings. I read it 3 times, my hand stayed steady. That would come later, and only because I needed them to. $51,400. I had wired that exact amount to my son 6 weeks earlier, sitting at my kitchen table on a gray September morning, watching the confirmation screen on my laptop the way I'd once watched a jury filing back into a courtroom. I don't forget numbers. 26 years of cross-examining men who lied for a living taught me to hold on to every digit, like it might save my life someday. Preston had called that Monday, said the taxes were coming due, said he'd take care of the filing paperwork since he'd been helping manage things since Eleanor's passing. One less thing for you to worry about, Dad. I'd wired it the next morning. 51,400. Routing number, account number, confirmation code, all of it burned into my memory like a brand. And now the county was threatening to take the orchard Eleanor and I had built with our own 2 hands, tree by tree, season by season, over 4 decades. How long had my son been planning this? I folded the notice, slid it into my jacket pocket, and walked back up the gravel drive past the rows of bare cherry trees standing like witnesses against the graying October sky. I needed to hear Preston's voice explain this, and I needed to hear it before the day was over. I dialed him from the kitchen phone. The foreclosure notice sitting on the table beside the fireplace Eleanor and I had built with Riverstone 30 years earlier. 4 rings before he picked up, and when he did, I heard restaurant noise behind him. Glasses, laughter, the low murmur of a Chicago steakhouse on a weeknight. Dad, kind of a bad time. The county sent a foreclosure notice, I said, keeping my voice level. 51,400. Says it's overdue. A pause. Not the pause of surprise, the pause of a man doing math in his head. That's just a clerical error, Dad. County systems are a mess this time of year. I paid that back in September, same week you sent it. I'll get you the confirmation. Mistaken as always, I thought, but didn't say. I'd started keeping a black leather notebook the week Eleanor died, jotting down conversations, dates, small inconsistencies, old habits from decades of trial prep. I reached for it now and wrote down his exact words, underlined twice. The notice gives 15 days, I said. You worry too much. I'll drive up this weekend, we'll sort it out together. Don't call the county. You'll just confuse the paperwork worse. Okay? I gotta go, Dad. We're mid-course here. The line went dead before I could answer. No goodbye. Just silence, and the fire crackling in a hearth Eleanor and I had built together. And outside, the last cherry leaves letting go of their branches one by one. Preston and Vanessa arrived that Saturday at 6 in the evening, Vanessa in a cashmere coat, Preston in a suit, despite the weekend, both of them radiating the kind of practiced warmth that had, until recently, always fooled me completely. This is exactly what I told you, Dad, Preston said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. Eleanor and I had eaten 10,000 meals at county processing error. I can show you the canceled check Monday. I let my hands tremble slightly around my coffee mug. I was worried. Of course you were. Vanessa reached across and touched my hand, her diamond ring catching the lamplight. That's completely understandable. Actually, Dad, there's something else we need to talk about. She glanced at Preston. A small nod passed between them, the kind of silent agreement married conspirators develop after years of practice. "When I stopped by Wednesday to drop off some things," Vanessa said, her voice gentle, earnest. "The stove was on. Gas, just pouring out, no flame. I had to open every window. If I hadn't been there, Marcus, I let confusion cloud my face, let my gaze drift toward the cold fireplace. I don't remember that. That's what worries us," Preston said, leaning forward with practiced concern. "These lapses, they're happening more." I nodded slowly, let my brow furrow like a man reaching for a memory that wasn't there. What I did not say, what I let sit cold and quiet in my chest, was this. I had converted every burner in that kitchen to induction 2 years earlier, the month after Eleanor died, because the smell of gas reminded me too much of her Sunday morning pancakes. There has not been a working gas line in that kitchen since the spring after her funeral. I have the invoice in my filing cabinet, dated, stamped, signed. There was no gas leak. There never had been. But I said nothing. I only nodded and let them believe they'd planted the first seed of a lie I would spend the next 3 months quietly, patiently, harvesting evidence against. They left 20 minutes later, taillights disappearing down the gravel drive into the dark. I stood at the kitchen window and watched them go, and for the first time since Eleanor's funeral, I felt something in my chest that wasn't grief, it was clarity. I walked to the induction cooktop, 4 ceramic burners, electrical cord running clean to the wall outlet, no gas line, no gas smell, no leak that had ever existed outside of Vanessa's carefully rehearsed performance. This wasn't confusion. This was a plan. And understanding a plan is one thing. What came next, turning it against the 2 people who built it, required patience I'd spent a career learning to keep. The next morning, Sunday, Vanessa arrived alone, carrying a small amber bottle she set beside my coffee cup with practiced casualness. "The doctor said this would help with the memory issues, Dad. Completely natural. 1 in the morning, 1 at night. No pharmacy label. No prescription number. No physician's name anywhere on the bottle." "What doctor?" I asked, keeping my tone mild. "Dr. Sorensen, family medicine. Preston set up the appointment last week. Remember, after the stove thing? We drove you ourselves. There was no Dr. Sorensen. There had been no appointment. Another thread in a story being woven around a man they hoped was too foggy to notice the seams. "That's thoughtful of you," I said, and unscrewed the cap, shook a single unmarked capsule into my palm, and swallowed it with my coffee, while Vanessa watched, with an expression of warm, patient concern. "I need to know exactly what they're putting into my body," I told myself. Suspicion gets dismissed. Blood does not lie. Over the next 4 days, I swallowed exactly 4 of those capsules, 1 at a time, under careful watch. Monday morning with breakfast while Vanessa sat across from me. Monday evening when Preston brought dinner. Tuesday morning when Vanessa called specifically to remind me. Tuesday afternoon when Preston stopped by unannounced. 4 samples, enough for a full toxicology panel. After that, not one more. Monday night, alone in my office with an old tablet disconnected from the house network, I researched the brand printed on that unmarked bottle. On the surface, nothing alarming, a generic cognitive support supplement marketed straight at anxious families of aging parents. But I dug past the surface the way I'd once dug through shell companies during a fraud court-martial 20 years earlier, and found 3 separate FDA warning letters about undisclosed pharmaceutical contamination in products from that exact manufacturer. Whatever was inside those capsules, it was not vitamin B12. Tuesday night, after Preston's car pulled out of the driveway, I sat at my workbench and cut an old leather wallet Eleanor had given me for our 10th anniversary into a small, soft pouch that would fit silently against my palm. I practiced in the bathroom mirror, pill to mouth, coffee sip, cough into a handkerchief, pill transferred to palm, pouch, pocket, 20 times, until the motion was invisible even to me. Wednesday morning, Vanessa brought the bottle again. I performed the routine flawlessly. 20 minutes later, Preston arrived, walked straight to the bathroom, lifted the toilet lid, ran the water, checked behind the tank. "Just making sure the old pipes aren't backing up, Dad," he said on his way out. He wasn't checking pipes. He was checking whether I was actually swallowing what they were giving me. By Friday, 3 separate visits in 1 week, all under the same flimsy excuse. I understood the full shape of what was happening. This was never caregiving, this was surveillance. And surveillance requires a subject who has no idea he's being watched. That Thursday evening, I noticed the brass key to my office safe sitting on my nightstand at the wrong angle. I have kept that key at precisely 45 degrees to the table edge since my years traveling for courts-martial, a habit born from a bribed evidence clerk who once rifled through my briefcase in a hotel room in 1994. Obsessive, maybe, but it had never once failed me. Someone had picked it up, studied it, put it back wrong. I stood there staring at that key, and something cold and steady settled into my chest. Not panic, but the same methodical calm I'd carried into every courtroom for 26 years. Someone had been in my bedroom. Someone had touched the key to my safe, which meant someone was planning to get inside it. Saturday afternoon, I found out exactly how. I lay on the living room sofa with my eyes narrowed to slits, breathing slow, and even the picture of an old man napping in the afternoon light. I heard Vanessa's car in the driveway, her key, a key I had never given her, turning in a lock she should not have been able to open, through barely open eyes. I watched her pause at the doorway, study me for any sign of wakefulness, then move toward my coat hanging by the door. Her hand went straight to the right pocket, the pocket where I kept the brass safe key. With the confidence of someone who already knew exactly where to look, she pulled a small round compact from her purse. Not makeup. Soft impression wax, the kind locksmiths use. She pressed the key into the wax, held it steady for 3 full seconds, examined the impression against the window light, and whispered to herself, "That's all we need." The key went back into my coat pocket, exact position. The compact disappeared into her purse. 40 seconds, start to finish, and she was gone before I ever opened my eyes. I lay there another 5 minutes, counting my own heartbeat, before I let myself sit up. They had a wax impression of my safe key now. Within days, they would have a duplicate, and they would use it to access the deeds, the trust documents, the 43 years of paperwork, proving what Eleanor and I had actually built. Proof they would twist into evidence of my incompetence, into justification for the very conservatorship hearing I would eventually walk into wearing overalls 3 months later, with the whole world thinking I was nothing more than a confused old farmer who didn't know where he was. They thought they were building their case against me. What they didn't know was that I still had one Sunday morning left before they'd act on that key, and I intended to use every minute of it. Sunday morning, 5 a.m., 2 hours before Preston and Vanessa's usual drive down to Chicago for their Sunday routine. I knelt in the dark before the safe in my office, listening to the tumblers click into place one by one. No lights. Just the small desk lamp angled toward the floorboards. Inside sat 43 years of documentation, the property deed, showing the orchard's true value at just under $7 million, once you counted the frontage on the bay and the standing cherry crop contracts. Bank statements, trust paperwork Eleanor and I had set up together the year before she got sick. Stock certificates from a modest portfolio I'd built slowly, carefully, the same way I built everything. All of it had to disappear. I removed the real documents one by one and slid them behind the false panel at the back of the safe, a compartment I'd installed 20 years earlier during a witness tampering scandal that had gotten uncomfortably personal. Never thought I'd use it against my own son. Different lifetime. Same principle. Protect what matters, sacrifice what doesn't. Then I began the replacement. I had spent 3 days quietly assembling fake documents, photocopied signatures close enough to pass a glance, but different enough to prove forgery under real examination. Inflated land valuations claiming the orchard was worth $22 million instead of $7 million, account numbers that led nowhere or to closed accounts belonging to strangers. Between the pages, I tucked 3 GPS trackers smaller than grains of rice, leftover military-issue hardware I'd kept from a case decades earlier and never returned to evidence. The moment someone photographed these pages with a smartphone, I would know exactly where that phone had been. I sealed the compartment, checked it twice, closed the safe, spun the dial. A trap baited with fresh lies and sharpened truth. First light was breaking over the cherry rose by the time I finished. Monday morning, from a burner phone bought with cash 3 days earlier, I dialed a number I hadn't used in over a decade. Dr. Priya Nandi, a former Army toxicologist I'd worked alongside during 2 separate court-martial cases, now running a private lab outside Grand Rapids. Priya, it's Marcus Doyle. I need anonymous toxicology work, no system entry. 2 seconds of silence, the sound of a careful mind calculating. Marcus, give me the shape of the threat and the timeline. I gave her 5 flat, unemotional sentences. Son and daughter-in-law administering an unknown compound disguised as a memory supplement. Need blood analysis and pill identification. Cannot use local facilities where my son might have connections. Needs to be done quietly and quickly. Bring the bottle and the samples Tuesday morning, she said. I'll run a full panel, including degradation analysis. If someone's changing the dosage over time, the compound variance will show it. I hadn't even considered that. She was right too. Tuesday, 5 a.m., I drove my old F-150. No GPS, no OnStar, nothing that could report where I'd gone. 4 hours south through back roads I hadn't driven since my circuit court days. Avoiding the highway and every automated plate reader on it. Snow started 20 minutes into the drive and never let up. Priya's lab sat behind an unmarked steel door in an industrial park outside the city. No greeting, pure efficiency. She held the vial of self-drawn blood up to the light, checked it for clean separation, then opened the pill bottle, cut 1 capsule open on a metal tray, and studied the white powder that spilled out. Pharmaceutical grade, she said, almost to herself. Not street quality. Someone with medical access. Vanessa volunteered 2 mornings a week at the regional hospital gift shop, a detail she'd mentioned so casually over dinner, I'd never once thought to question it. Access I had never questioned, until now. I drove back through worsening snow, arrived home with 5 minutes to spare before Preston's scheduled Tuesday check-in call, and answered on the 5th ring, sounding exactly as exhausted as 4 hours of white-knuckle mountain roads through a blizzard would actually make a man sound. Except I let him believe the exhaustion came from the pills, not the drive. That's normal, Dad, he said. When I told him my legs felt heavy, my thinking felt slow. You're adjusting to the supplement. Adjusting to poison, I thought, and said nothing else. I wanted to let you know, Preston added, his voice shifting into something falsely bright. I'm bringing a doctor up this weekend, a colleague. Just to do a proper cognitive assessment, make sure we're managing things the right way. A colleague. Not a doctor I'd ever met. A paid signature waiting to happen. That's good, I said. I appreciate you looking after me. Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. sharp, Priya's number lit up the burner phone. Sit down before I tell you this, she said, and I already was. It's not a supplement, Marcus. It's an industrial-strength antipsychotic, quetiapine, at triple the standard therapeutic dose for a man your age. For a healthy 69-year-old, this creates artificial dementia symptoms, tremors, disorientation, memory blackouts, profound fatigue, and at this concentration the cardiac risk for anyone over 65 is severe. You're in the danger zone. I wrote the compound name in my notebook, letters sharp and precise. There's more, Priya said. I ran your 4 samples chronologically. She's escalating the dosage. First sample, baseline. Second, 18% higher. Third, 40% higher. Fourth, 62% higher than the original. That wasn't a mistake. That was a calculated experiment in how much a human body could absorb before it broke. At the current rate, Priya said quietly, I'd estimate 12 days before the cognitive damage becomes permanent. Beyond that, roughly 3 weeks before a fatal cardiac event becomes statistically likely, and a medical examiner looking at a 69-year-old man with documented cognitive decline would call it natural causes. No one would ever look twice. 3 weeks. That was the runway they'd given me to live, dressed up as vitamins. I called Harlan Voss that same afternoon, a civil attorney I'd faced across a courtroom a dozen times in the 90s and respected more than almost anyone else I'd ever fought against. Judge Doyle, he said, picking up on the second ring. It's been years. I need everything you've got, off the books, fast, I said, and gave him the same 5 flat sentences I'd given Priya, plus what I'd witnessed with the wax impression and the fake documents already baited and waiting in my safe. 10 seconds of silence on his end. Then his voice went cold and businesslike. Conservatorship fraud. Emergency petition. I've seen this pattern 3 times in the last decade. You have maybe 2 weeks before they file, Marcus. Once that emergency order hits, you lose banking access, property control, legal standing, all of it, same day. Then help me force their hand before they force mine, I said, Thursday, walking my usual property inspection loop along the orchard's north boundary. I found them. 3 bright orange survey stakes driven into the frozen ground. Corporate tags stamped Meridian Solar Partners, permit numbers, an installation date 3 weeks earlier. These weren't survey markers. They were ownership stakes. I pulled one from the ground, photographed the tag from every angle with the burner phone. Preston had sold rights to 12 acres of our northern orchard, including the row of trees Eleanor and I had planted our very first spring together, to a solar development company for land that, fully developed with the cherry contracts intact, was worth close to $2 million in that section alone, sold before it ever belonged to him. I stood there in the frozen orchard, hand against the bark of the oldest tree in that row, and said aloud to no one, I won't let them take you. By Friday, Harlan's forensic team had the rest. Preston's investment firm was a shell propped up on borrowed time, no legitimate revenue in over 2 years, $800,000 owed to a private lending group operating well outside any legal interest cap, compounding at a rate that would have made a loan shark blush. The Meridian Solar deal was Preston's desperate attempt to raise enough cash to keep those lenders from collecting the hard way. He's drowning, Harlan said, and he's using your orchard as a life raft. Problem is, he's willing to let you sink to stay afloat. That Saturday morning, 7 a.m., an alert came through on the tablet Harlan had set up in my office. One of the GPS trackers hidden in the fake documents had activated at Meridian Solar's regional headquarters, time-stamped 11:40 the previous night. The exact hour Preston's car had appeared in my driveway, headlights off, using a duplicate key that should never have existed to walk straight into my office and photograph every fabricated page inside that safe. He'd taken the bait completely and delivered it, gift-wrapped, directly into the hands of a company that was about to discover every document he'd sent them was fraudulent. I spent that Sunday evening watching Vanessa slip 3 drops of something amber-colored from a small dropper bottle into my chamomile tea while her back was turned toward the counter, watched her return the dropper to her purse, watched her hand me the cup with a smile that had fooled me for 10 years and would never fool me again. I held the liquid in my mouth, spit it discreetly into a folded napkin the second she turned away, and kept the cup raised to my lips, as though I were drinking every drop. Where do you keep the bank documents these days, Dad? She asked, settling across from me with the casual voice of a woman fishing for a location she already knew she'd need. Just so we're organized. For the future. I don't remember right now, I said, and let my hand tremble around the cup. She smiled, patient, certain. That's okay, Dad, we'll find them. They already thought they had. Monday morning, alone in my office, I pulled a digital voice recorder from the bottom desk drawer, the same model I'd carried in my jacket pocket through 26 years of court-martial hearings, a machine that had helped convict men far more dangerous than my own son. Fresh battery, 64 gigabytes of memory, more than enough to catch every word left to come. I placed it in my inner shirt pocket and never took it out again. That same week, I dialed a name I hadn't used in 15 years. Earl Whitfield, 74, retired Grand Traverse County Sheriff, my neighbor of 30 years, and the closest thing to a brother I had left since my own past. Earl had helped clear his nephew of a wrongful manslaughter charge decades earlier, back when I still sat on the bench and could review evidence that mattered. He'd been waiting a long time to return that favor. Say the word, Marcus, Earl said when I told him what I needed. I know 2 men who still owe me quiet favors. Tuesday night, 11 p.m. 3 shadows crossed my back lawn without a sound, and installed thermal cameras along the orchard's perimeter, and hidden recording equipment behind my living room mantel, wired directly into the house's electrical system so batteries would never need changing. 25 minutes, professional, invisible, when Preston's car swept back into my driveway 2 nights later at nearly midnight. Headlights cutting through fresh snowfall, thermal cameras 2 miles out caught every second of what came next. Because 30 seconds before his headlights ever appeared, I had already walked outside in thin pajamas, barefoot on frozen gravel, arms raised to the December sky, calling Eleanor's name into the storm. Eleanor. Eleanor, where are you? Please, I can't find you. Preston's phone was already filming by the time his car doors opened. Jesus. Vanessa, look at him. This is exactly what we needed. Every word landed clean on the recorder in my shirt pocket. Vanessa dragged me back toward the house by the arm, my bare feet leaving small cuts in the snow. Perfect detail for the footage Preston needed. Inside, she pressed a pill against my lips. I tucked it against my cheek and mimed a swallow while she watched my throat, satisfied. They left 20 minutes later. Preston still reviewing his video, Vanessa already on her phone making calls. I waited until their taillights disappeared, then pulled up the thermal footage on Harlan's tablet, Testament 11:43. I walk outside alone, 30 full seconds before headlights ever appear, timestamp 11:45. Preston's car enters the frame. His video would show a delusional old man wandering a snowstorm, calling for his dead wife. Mine showed a man who had walked outside and begun the performance a full half-minute before his son ever arrived. Proof it was staged, and proof of exactly who had staged it. Wednesday morning, Harlan called with news that changed everything. They filed Marcus. Emergency X party hearing, Friday 2 p.m., Judge Ronan Cole presiding. You've got 48 hours. Not the 2 weeks he'd predicted. They'd moved the timeline up. 2 psychiatrists signed affidavits, Harlan continued. Neither of them has ever met you. Both received $100,000 each from an offshore account tied to Vanessa 4 days before they evaluated you. $200,000 in bribes, dressed up as medicine. I sat with that number for a long moment, looking out at the cherry rows dusted white with early snow, and understood exactly what I needed to do next. Force Preston's hand before Friday ever arrived, and make him move so fast, so desperately, that he'd hand me everything I still needed on a silver plate. That afternoon, I called him from the kitchen landline, let my hand tremble against the receiver. Preston, I've been thinking about the orchard, about what your mother would want. I'm donating the whole thing, all $7 million, to the county's Veterans Housing Fund. Monday morning, 9 a.m., lawyer's office. Papers are already drawn up. Silence, complete silence. Then his voice, straining to stay calm. Dad, that's a big decision. Why don't I come up today? We can talk it through. My mind's made up, son. It's what your mother would have wanted. I hung up before he could argue further, hands genuinely trembling now. Not from performance, but from the weight of what I'd just set in motion. 90 minutes later, headlights swept across my living room wall. Preston, alone this time, no Vanessa, carrying a folder of property protection paperwork he needed me to sign that very night, a power of attorney disguised as an act of caution, meant to cancel my Monday donation before it ever happened. I let him talk. I let the recorder in my cardigan pocket catch every single word. Just sign here, Dad, he said, sliding the papers across the coffee table, pen already uncapped. Protect the estate tonight. We'll find the right charity together. Something your mother would really love. I picked up the pen, let it hover, set it back down. My hands shaking too much tonight. Tomorrow, I promise. He left frustrated but unable to push harder without revealing exactly how desperate he'd become. Thursday, 8 a.m., Harlan's tablet lit up with an alert. Meridian Solar's own compliance team had flagged inconsistencies in the documents Preston had photographed and transmitted from my safe. Routing numbers that didn't match verification records. Signatures that didn't hold up under forensic review. They were demanding original documents within 48 hours, or the entire deal was void, with fraud charges to follow, 48 hours for Meridian. 18 days before Preston's private lenders would come collecting the debt he'd tried to pay off with land he never legally owned. 4 days until my fictional Monday donation. 1 day until Friday's hearing. Every clock I had quietly, deliberately set in motion was about to go off at exactly the same time. Friday, 7:30 a.m. Before the hearing, before Vanessa's tea, before any of it, 2 county deputies and a social worker had already come for me under an emergency evaluation order. the very same elder protection statute I had helped draft 22 years earlier as a JEG advisor to the state legislature, back when I still believed the law only ever protected the vulnerable. Preston had turned my own words into a weapon. I let them dress me in whatever they liked, let them drive me to a 3-day psychiatric hold, and performed confusion with the same precision I'd once used cross-examining hostile witnesses. What Preston's $100,000 doctors never knew was that I had once consulted on psychiatric evaluation protocols for the very court system now holding me. I knew exactly which symptoms to fail and exactly which ones to pass. Section 14B of that same statute, a safeguard I had personally written into the law, buried in language that looked like procedural formality, allowed anyone held under emergency order to present evidence of medical fraud within 96 hours and have the entire order voided from inception. Friday, 7:30 a.m. was hour 0. Monday, 8 a.m. The moment the courthouse doors opened would be hour 72 and a half, inside the window. Just barely. They dressed me for that Monday, hearing themselves. Vanessa sent the overalls, the mud-crusted boots, the faded cap, determined to present me to Judge Cole as a broken old farmer who couldn't manage his own affairs. I wore every piece without complaint. Let them believe their own performance until the very last second. Preston's attorney, Grant Ellery, opened with 20 smooth minutes, psychiatric affidavits, a heavily edited 4-minute video trimmed down to 20 seconds of me wandering barefoot in a snowstorm, bank statements arranged to suggest confusion where there had only ever been theft. The courtroom sat in heavy, sympathetic silence. "Mr. Doyle," Judge Cole said gently when Ellery finished, "do you understand why you're here today?" I lifted my head slowly, let my eyes clear, and reached up to pull the 2 dog tags fully out from beneath my collar, letting them catch the fluorescent light. Judge Cole's gavel slipped from his fingers and struck the bench with a crack that silenced the entire room. "Judge Doyle," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, rising halfway out of his chair. "Your Honor, is it you?" 25 years earlier, as a terrified young defense attorney facing a court-martial he was about to lose on a technicality his own commanding officer had engineered against him, Ronan Cole had stood in front of my bench in Fort Leavenworth while I overturned a wrongful conviction that would have ended his career and possibly his freedom before either had truly begun. He had sent me a letter of gratitude that year. I still had it in a drawer at home. "It's been a long time, Ronan," I said, my voice steady, clear, no tremor left anywhere in it. The courtroom held its breath. Preston's face drained white. Vanessa's hand found his arm. "Your Honor," I said, standing straighter than I had in 3 months. "I invoke Section 14B of the statute under which I was held. I am within the 96-hour window, and I have evidence of systemic medical fraud." "Permission granted," Judge Cole said. "Present it." Harlan wheeled in 6 boxes of evidence, Priya's toxicology reports showing the escalating quetiapine dosage across 6 weeks. Credit card statements proving Vanessa had purchased the compound from 3 separate online pharmacies. Thermal footage showing Preston staging and filming 17 separate episodes. GPS logs proving the fake documents had been photographed and transmitted to Meridian Solar from Preston's own law office. Bank records showing both psychiatrists had received $100,000 each, 4 days before their independent evaluations, and the unedited 4-minute recording proving I had walked outside a full 30 seconds before Preston's headlights ever appeared. "Your Honor," I added quietly, "at 7:45 this morning, both psychiatrists were taken into custody in this courthouse's own lobby on fraud warrants. Your bailiff can confirm." He did. Grant Ellery closed his briefcase and withdrew from the case without another word. Judge Cole's gavel came down like a gunshot. Conservatorship order vacated. Respondent restored to full legal capacity. Bench warrants issued. Conspiracy. Elder financial exploitation. Forgery. Administering a controlled substance with intent to harm. Bailiff, take them into custody. Preston tried to run. Got 3 steps before a deputy caught his arm. As they led Vanessa past me in handcuffs, she dropped to her knees and grabbed at my sleeve. "Dad, please, I'm family." I looked down at her without bending. "You chose this the day you put that bottle on my counter." 8 weeks later, In the same courtroom, Judge Cole handed down the sentences. Preston, 11 years federal, license revoked, 4.2 million in restitution to Meridian Solar. Vanessa, 7 years state, dosage escalation enhancement applied. Every dollar of her offshore accounts seized for victim restitution. I didn't feel triumph watching them led away. I felt the particular ache of a man who had won every battle and still lost the only son he had. That spring, I signed $7 million of orchard land into a permanent trust. Eleanor's Cherry Orchard Legacy, protecting the land forever for kids from the county's foster and veteran housing programs to learn farming, free from any future family's greed. Judge Cole agreed without hesitation to serve as honorary chairman. Earl Whitfield became caretaker of the North Rose, and Lily Chen, the 16-year-old neighbor girl who'd spent every autumn weekend since she was 12 helping me prune and pick, who never once looked at me like I was fragile or foolish, was named the Trust's first-name scholarship recipient, full tuition, agricultural science, for as long as she wanted it. The morning after I signed those papers, Lily found me sitting on the porch with 2 cups of coffee, one already going cold beside Eleanor's old chair. "You could have just let them win, you know," she said, sitting down on the step below me. "Would have been easier." "Easier isn't always the same as right," I told her. She thought about that for a while, watching the mist lift off the cherry rose. "I think," she finally said, "the people who really love you don't need you to be perfect. They just need you to still be you when nobody's testing them." I never forgot that line. I don't think I ever will. Somewhere in a federal facility, my son is learning to measure time in years instead of billable hours. Somewhere in a state facility, his wife is learning what 8 seasons of missed cherry blossoms actually feels like. But most mornings now, I don't think about their sentences at all. I think about Eleanor, about the trees she planted with her own 2 hands, and about a 16-year-old girl who will walk those same rows long after I'm gone, carrying forward something greedy hands tried and failed to take. And to you, listening all the way to the end of this one, remember this. The people who are supposed to protect you can sometimes be the very ones you need protection from. My mistake was never trusting my son too much. It was ignoring the small signs long before they became impossible to ignore. If this story meant something to you tonight, tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't yet, subscribe for more stories about standing your ground when the people closest to you test exactly how much you're willing to lose. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I read every single comment you leave. A final note. Certain names and details in this story have been adjusted for privacy and for the sake of the telling, but the lesson at its heart is real, and it's one worth carrying with you.